your compliance. You will feel no pain anymore, no more defiance. Just give us your compliance.
Hey everybody, it is Larry Sharpe here on the Sharpe Way Show. It is a little bit past 8 p.m. on the East Coast. I know I'm a little bit late today. Don't be mad. At least I showed up, right? Look, showing up is half the battle. So I did show up today, and I let you know it was going to be 8 tonight. I didn't just pop in. So I was kind of good. I'm very happy that you would give me a chunk of your evening. For some of you who were able to watch yesterday evening debate I had with Howie Hawkins, sorry for the glitches that I had. However, you can still check that out on Chrissy Mayer's YouTube page. She has been very good and posted it there if you want to check that out. I may rerun it here one of these days, maybe tomorrow or the day after, so you can watch that if you'd like. But tonight we're going to have a good show too, a very interesting show with a very interesting person who I've known for a bit here. And if you know it's going to be good, and you do, then do the right thing, like, comment, share, let people know this is happening so they can come over and go, oh, I would like to watch Larry Sharpe talk to people also. So let them know that. Come do that. It does help tremendously. And of course, support my sponsors, theadvocates.org, the world's smallest political quiz. And why that matters, you might say, Larry, you are always pushing that. I am. You're right. Guilty as charged. I push it because that short quiz, just 1 or 2 minutes, actually gets people thinking about basic ideas on politics and makes you have better conversations. It does matter. I want you to have more conversations. Take that quiz, share it with others, and then they'll start having conversations too. And there is an interesting piece that you might not realize, but because we have the data from literally decades of people taking this quiz, we can see where the country's going for people based upon people who are taking the quiz. You know what we're seeing? A little bit more in authoritarianism. Yeah, a little scary, but actually true. We're shifting that way. You can make that change. Let people know they've taken this test. I want to bring in, if I could, my guest, a woman who is trying to make many things happen, a woman who is fighting a juggernaut, the monster that is Chuck Schumer here in New York State. She has decided to try to be, a Goliath killer if she can, figuratively FBI, don't get me in trouble, figuratively a giant slayer if she can. Woman running for Senate in New York State with the LaRouche party, Diane Sare. Diane, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you very much. Glad to be here with you.
I am happy to have you here. And those of you who want some more information on Diane, you can head over to Sare4Senate.com, and that's all spelled. That's not the number 4. That's Sare, F-O-R, Senate.com, and Sare is S-A-R-E if you're listening to this on the podcast. So I got to ask you, Diane, it seems like maybe even a crazy thing to do going up against Chuck Schumer. I mean, he's huge. Why make this run?
Well, because I think the nation is headed in the wrong direction. And I thought, it certainly wasn't a presidential election year, and that's a daunting idea. But what was a tall challenge where I would be able to use my voice, hopefully, to provide some badly needed leadership, maybe to serve as an example of what someone running for federal office or holding federal office should be concerned with. You see so many people getting hysterical about relatively minor issues when we are facing life and death matters.
But hold on, let me ask the question though, right? I know years ago, the LaRouche party kind of was more, at least LaRouche was kind of attached to the Democratic Party years ago. And then that link broke. Why didn't you decide to say either primary Schumer in the Democratic Party, go back to the old LaRouche style, or maybe run as a Republican against him? What made you decide to do the independent route?
Well, because I think we have to unify people. And I thought that if I ran as a Democrat, given how totally insane the Democratic Party has become, that would alienate a lot of people. People are running in the opposite direction, like Tulsi Gabbard most prominently, but many. And frankly, the Republican Party, there are a lot of old school Democrats that may hate the Democratic Party, but they're not ready to be Republicans. And I thought, since we're facing nuclear war, shortages of food, shortages of fuel, these are not partisan issues. So if I run as an independent, then perhaps I can pull together a movement and a policy that can address this. And maybe there's a way of pulling a lot larger number of people together by getting away from this party divisiveness.
I like that. Well, Joel, he's a fan. He says, I just saw a Diane Sare sign near Albany.
Oh,
So
good.
someone likes you. I like that. There we go. There we go. Something's working. Yes, absolutely. So that's kind of cool, I guess. Yes. And Pete says, vote anyone but Chuck Schumer. There we go. So you got a couple of fans already. It's
Great.
great. But there's certain issues, you brought up the idea of nuclear war, right? And I know that you are worried about that. In fact, you also brought up Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi talked about nuclear war literally years ago, right? She was talking about the worry about that 2019, 2020. She was worried about that. She was like, that's a big deal. People aren't talking about it. And now people are like, well, I guess you were kind of right. But you're very concerned. Tell me about that. I mean, most people, I think, feel like, well, Putin's evil, so he's a bad guy, so we got to go beat up Putin. I think most people believe that. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that most people believe it, although that's certainly the line in the mainstream news media. And
Okay,
when the
maybe that's what I'm talking about. Okay.
Yeah, and the mainstream news media has a way of creating a kind of a bubble, or that people feel like they have to conform. So in polite company, they would never dare to say, look, I don't really think this is all Putin's fault, even though they might think it. But when someone tells the truth, I've had so many people come up to me in the campaign and say, I don't think that Russia-Ukraine situation is what they're telling us. Or, and then they'll wink and, and if I tell them what I think, then they'll open up, but they wouldn't dare. I mean, we are in quite a police state, as you know.
Yes.
So you don't, and you get, this is such the evil thing about what's happened with these social media, with Facebook, Twitter, all of these things. And I think they know it very well, is that if you ban people from saying certain things, then people will self-censor because they don't want to be on lose that. And then what happens is they stop even thinking those things because they never express it. So it really is behavior modification, thought crimes. But I'll tell you, actually, LaRouche was warning. He's been warning about nuclear war, had been since Jimmy Carter. Did a famous.
I want to go back to the censorship piece before we go there.
Okay, yeah.
I think the self-censorship piece is a real piece, right? Jesse goes, it works. Yeah, right. And now you come to a point where people are afraid. I had a friend of mine who said, Larry, I want to go on certain shows or certain podcasts, and they don't want me to go on because they don't want me to say what I'm saying. And I thought, because to your point, Diane, they're self-censoring, right? They don't want the wrong person on, because they'll say the wrong thing and then their audience will try to cancel them. So it's self-censorship. And then because you're self-censoring, it makes it feel like, well, everybody must believe it. That's kind of where you're going with this, right?
Exactly. And really everybody doesn't. And see, that's the point also of leadership, because it's like the little boy who pointed out that the emperor had no clothes. Well, everyone went along with it because they were all told, if you can't see the emperor's new clothes, then it means you're not fit for your position. You're going to lose your job. You're going to be demoted. Well, the little boy had nothing to lose. So he said, hey, the emperor's naked. And then the whole crowd said, he's naked. So they all knew it, but they didn't say it. So the
question becomes, you're saying that, and let's say you win this thing, or you don't win, but you become popular enough that people start hearing you. Either one, right? Either one. Mm-hmm. In any case, you get the voice you wanted, you get it. Right. And now you're saying it. How do you fix it? Maybe don't fix it. How do you make it better? What do we do to kind of stop people from self-censoring, or do we? Is this a lost cause?
No, it's not a lost cause. That's a very interesting question. I think we have to fight for forums where we can speak freely. I know people are moving to Rumble and this and that alternative forum to be able to do that. I started a newspaper because I figured if I had something in print, they couldn't get rid of me. So I started a printed newspaper so that I would have the freedom to say what I wanted. Now, I'll tell you something very funny because, I have these billboards up on the Gowanus on Northern
Yes.
Boulevard, and they say U.S. out of NATO, dump Schumer. Now, they're pretty expensive. So I paid for these billboards, and then they say, now we recommend don't use more than 7 words. Tell us your text. So my text was, stop blaming Putin and look in the mirror.
Ooh.
And with a picture of Schumer in a mirror, that's what I wanted. And they said, no, you're not allowed to say Putin. And that's
Wow.
my money, and it says paid for by Sare for they don't have to take any responsibility for this whatsoever.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they said, oh, and by the way, you cannot say Russia, China, or North Korea
Wow.
for a billboard that I'm paying for. Right.
Wow.
So I was very tempted to just say, well, give me my money back. But then I say, how am I going to reach people? So I tried to think of the
Hold
most.
on. I want to touch what you just said. That is so incredibly important, what you just said. You wanted to say, give me my money back. But then you realized, but then how do I make change, right? So they've set up a system to where you kind of have to do what they tell you to do so you can change what they tell you to do.
Exactly. That's true. That's true. That's true. Really true. Because, so then I just thought, well, what is the thing that's going to enrage people the most who are starting this war? Because the only way I'm going to get anywhere is if I can poke something that gets people upset.
Right.
So I decided on U.S. out of NATO. And I know it works because one person who had done a great deal with me prior to that billboard totally flipped out and said, tell her I don't want anything to do with her ever again. So
there we go. Yes, now you're winning.
Right.
Absolutely. Now you're winning. So yes. Shelley says, I was going to do the underground newspapers. Yeah. And I mean, it's funny that because what you just said, now you kind of have to go back to old school, right? Because as we get more monopolies and oligarchies controlling all the tip-top technology, now we've got to go back to old school so that we can't be canceled if you got to walk around handing out newspapers now. It's
Right.
crazy, but I think you're right. It's like, I don't want you to be right, but you're right. Right? You're just right. It's terrible. Scott jokes, don't follow the masses because sometimes the M is silent. There we go.
Yes.
I think you're absolutely right. So Andrew goes on to say the mainstream media won't admit that NATO is not expanding east towards Russia. Admit that NATO not expanding east towards Russia was in the agreement when the USSR dissolved.
Exactly.
So is this now I'm going to mix those two together now. I'm assuming then, because you're saying that US should be out of NATO, that you feel that one of the reasons why Putin invaded was because of NATO. Am I right with that?
No, what that person said is completely true. James Baker III promised Gorbachev in February 1990, not 1 inch. You let Germany reunify, which is a pretty big deal given the 27 million people in the Soviet Union were killed by the Nazis.
Yes.
So it's not asking a small thing for the reunification of Germany.
Mhm.
And they said, okay. And we said, NATO will not expand. And then for months, the US press tried to say that was never said. And then witness upon witness upon witness came forward and said, well, actually,
Right.
it was said. We promised, and now NATO is 1,000 kilometers farther to the east. 14 more nations have joined it. And now we're trying to get Finland and Sweden in there. And you even have people talking about putting nuclear weapons in Sweden or Finland, which is beyond insane. I mean, we're at this is just almost the exact 60th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And people somehow have forgotten Kennedy nearly brought the world to nuclear war because it was unacceptable to have Soviet missiles 90 miles off our coast. You're talking about right in your backyard. It would be like a nuclear missile in Mexico.
Right.
Right now, but you had a Kennedy, we have a Biden.
Right. They're not the same.
No.
They're not the same.
I think you're going out on a limb.
Now we're in a bad spot though now, right? I mean, the war is going on. We have put tons of money into this war. It's still happening now. Lots of Russians are now dead. Lots of Ukrainians are now dead. How does an America now fix this again, or is it too broken? What's the next step? If you either get the voice that you want or you win this thing, either one, and you now can influence. What do you advise? What do you try to make happen? How I don't. This seems like such a broken spot. A part of me just wants to say cut and run, but I don't know if that's the answer either.
Well, you
How do we
can't
how do we
look,
do
we
this?
have to, first of all, we have to stop sending weapons to Ukraine. We should
Okay.
stop it. We are encouraging a totally losing battle. They are losing soldiers in a ratio of 5 to 1 to 20 to 1 relative to the Russian casualties. I mean, look at the two nations, look at the size of them, look at the history.
Mhm.
Forget it. NATO and the US trained a lot of troops. They created an army that, and they're fighting for what they think is their country, so they're fighting pretty hard, but they're not going to win. Um, so we should encourage negotiation, but of course, that's not the position of the US government right now.
Yeah, but right now, that's not the position even of Zelensky now, right? He's like, we're gonna take over
Well,
everything and
I
we're gonna
don't
push
think
the Russians out. He's talking all kind of trash right now, isn't he? I mean, he's
Well,
on his
he
high
does
horse.
what he's told. He does what he's told by the British, by the US. And I don't know if you heard about, speaking about the British, Liz Truss's indiscreet text that she sent to Tony Blinken.
No.
This is a very big deal, breaking story. Liz Truss, less than a minute after the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up, sent a text to Blinken saying it is done.
No.
Yes, and she didn't use her encrypted phone, and so now the Russians are demanding an explanation. Um, the whole world said when Nord Stream got blown up, the whole world said, why would Russia blow up their own pipeline? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. You had the
So
quotes.
does that mean now we're gonna have to? I mean, this at one point peace becomes peace becomes difficult until it becomes the only answer, right? So if you pass a point in almost any war to where the only way this is going to end now is through somebody being devastated, right? Early on, usually you can, hey, whoa, we were kidding. What's going on? Can we do something? But then there's a point to where the belligerents are so hyped up and have thrown so much blood and treasure into it that it's not stopping until someone's battered down to almost nothing. I feel like we're almost there. Like we kind of got to let either Russia or Ukraine get hammered to almost nothing before we'll talk about peace. And my worry is if we just say Ukraine, no more weapons, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but my worry is that we're just allowing the Ukrainians to be battered into the ground. Is that
Well,
a fair
no,
statement or no?
no, because by arming the Ukrainians is what's going to get them battered into the ground. You may
Okay.
recall in March or April, Zelensky actually wanted to negotiate. He was talking about Ukraine not joining NATO, and
Hmm.
Boris Johnson hopped on his airplane, probably a cargo jet because he's so fat, and had to fly over there to tell him, no, 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 that's not the operation. Don't surrender. Why? Because we're trying to bleed Russia. We're trying to destroy Russia.
Got it.
And we will do that to the life of the last Ukrainian. It is really
Ugh.
sick. It is like
Ugh.
satanic. Um, so it is so cruel to use people that way and to finance and enhance the Nazi Banderist element who are committing horrible atrocities, not only against the Russian prisoners of war who are being castrated before they're released. And I mean, just horrible crimes. And even Amnesty International is saying the Ukrainian army is committing war crimes. But
So
they're
look,
commit.
but this goes to my point, right? Now, if I'm Russian and I'm seeing this happen, I'm going to say, I'm not having peace with these guys. I want to keep fighting them, right?
Well,
And if
no,
I'm
no,
Ukrainian, I'm
it's
going to
not.
be like, I want to keep fighting these guys, aren't I?
No, see, except for the Nazi elements and what the US and the UK and NATO are funding and arming, these people are totally intermarried. It's totally. Scott Ritter actually said it would be like New York and New Jersey having a war.
That'd be kind of
And
weird.
yeah, and I was at a meeting actually the other night with Ritter, a book signing, and this former Soviet Russian guy who was, must have been 70 years old, was completely gut wrenched. He said, "You have to understand, my daughter is in the Russian army. The husband of my other daughter is in the Ukrainian army.
Wow.
Every morning I wake up terrified
Sure.
to turn on the news." And I think this led to Putin's miscalculation at the beginning, if you want to call it that, because they thought, the Donbass had been being shelled for 8 years by the Kiev regime because the people in the Donbass were largely Russian speaking and they didn't like the Nazis and they didn't like being told you can't speak Russian. So 14,000 of them had been killed over 8 years. And Putin had said this is one of the red lines, or he said there are three
Mm.
red lines. Ukraine gets a nuclear weapon, Ukraine joins NATO, or ethnic cleansing in the Donbass. And while the West was hyping how Russia's going to invade, Russia's going to invade, Russia, we heard that for months, right?
Yep, I remember.
Well, what they didn't tell you was at the same time they were saying that, the Ukrainian army was massing on the internal border of the Donbass.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And the day before the special military operation began, they dropped 1,600 shells on Donetsk in one day.
So I'm hearing a lot of reasons why the war started. I'm trying to figure out what's the first step for the U.S. The first step is just to not give them weapons anymore. Is that the first step? I mean,
Well, we
how do
have
we
to,
bring this to an end with the least amount of bloodshed
right?
possible? Right. I know there's going to
That's
be more
it.
bloodshed. I wish I could stop it, but how do we get the least amount of bloodshed and end this thing?
We say we want to encourage both parties to negotiate. We're going to no longer encourage Zelensky to keep fighting. We'll just pump you full of weapons and keep fighting. I thought actually what Elon Musk put forward was interesting. He said, you have to admit that Crimea is part of Russia. They held a referendum in 2014 or 15, voted 96%. They used to be part of Russia till
Yep.
1954. Just leave it, done. Then the other four oblasts, right? Donetsk, Lugansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, have a do-over. Let it be under UN supervision. If they want to join Russia in a different referendum with outside observers, okay. If they don't, they don't. And you stop the carnage and the bloodshed. Ukraine is neutral. They don't join NATO. Ukraine gets certain security guarantees from the West, right? And you could solve this. I think Putin was
So I
what?
like what you're saying right now. I'm in. I think it's a good. I think the concept is a good concept. My concern is why is no nation state saying that, right? Why aren't the Russians going, just do this and we'll stop? Or why aren't Ukrainians going, wait, let's do this? Or I don't know, why isn't, I don't know, Switzerland
Well,
stepping in and saying,
right.
hey, we're neutral, do this
Actually,
thing?
the Russians have been saying that.
They have.
And yes, they've been very clear. They said, I mean, for 8 years, Lugansk and Donetsk were trying to join Russia. And for 8 years, Putin said, no, stay in Ukraine, try and work under the Minsk Accords, where the Kiev regime was supposed to stop shelling, but they never stopped shelling. So,
Mm.
and I saw interviews with people there on the referendum. They said, we've been trying for 8 years to join the Russian Federation. I mean, that was their position. Also, I don't know if you're aware, but I thought this was kind of fun. Congressman Paul Gosar wrote a letter to Putin and Zelensky and said, you're welcome to come to Arizona and meet.
I
I
like
will
that.
host a conference. Now the Vatican is getting involved, but the real problem is this Anglo-American drive to just destroy
Mm,
Ukraine,
got it.
right? And I would say, see, really to stop it, you have to go one step behind that, which is the blowout of the transatlantic financial system. That's really the driver, that you've got a bunch of billionaires with all their money and derivatives and so on in the city of London and Wall Street. Like all bubbles, this bubble is going to collapse. It's done.
Correct.
And their view is if they can have a major war, then they can write off their debt. So they see no interest in having peace. They're perfectly happy. And you may have heard the British, I don't know if it was Blair or someone else over there who said it they said, Russia cannot win. Now, if that's your position, that you will not allow Russia to win against Ukraine, then you're going to nuclear war. Because all you have to know is what happened to Napoleon and what happened to Hitler to know Russia is not losing,
Right.
period.
Right. Huh. All right, let me grab a couple comments. You're getting people to comment here. Christopher says, can't say certain words. Oh my God, no freedom of speech in a country with constitutional freedom of speech. Yes, I'm still blown away by that can't say Putin, can't say Russia thing. I'm still blown away. Christopher's with me on this one. That's crazy. So yes. Ryan says, Tulsi is the Sybil Luddington of our town, alerting Americans of the clear and present dangers of nuclear war for years. We should listen to her. Well, and others too, Ryan. I mean, I think she's the most popular one, if that's true. But I think others have also talked about it. I mean, do you speak to Tulsi at all, Diane?
I've met her, but not in a few years. No, not directly. No.
Got it. So let's see. Be Vegan Now says, maybe find someone who will let you pay them to put a billboard or big sign banner on their property. Oh, maybe.
Yes, I have that. I have one. It's in Putnam County, and it says, stop blaming Putin.
There we
It's
go.
on the side of a truck. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. See, local grassroots. I love that.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Andrew says, I feel like a hero when I come out of that curtain on voting booth right behind you. Always are. Oh, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Great.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yes. Joel says, when the USSR dissolved, we should have gotten out of NATO. Exactly. I agree with that, right? My entire piece on this, just my personal opinion on this one. There was no need for us to be in NATO once the Soviet Union collapsed. No need at all. Just if the Europeans want to have their own union, good for you. Enjoy that. If you want to have a defense pact amongst yourselves, awesome. Good for you. But why do we have to be involved?
Right.
And
why is NATO involved in Afghanistan, and why is NATO spreading to the China Sea or South China Sea? I mean, that's crazy.
Yes, absolutely. So let me ask though a question. Do you think that nuclear weapons, do you care either way for nuclear proliferation? Is that a thing that you care either way about? Are you like, no one can get nukes anymore and we should stop everybody, or any of those things? So I think Ryan brings up a point. He says more and more nuclear weapons with zero reason. No logic and zero explanation why Finland, Sweden will need nuclear weapons. It's clear that the administration has said to their minions that. And I think his point is, do we need to, or should we not? Or what's your view on that? Should we be trying to stop people from nuclear weapons? Do you care either way?
I think that mankind should grow up, and we should figure out a way to get rid of nuclear weapons altogether.
Now you're asking a lot.
I know. And I don't know what that will take. You know, Douglas MacArthur was so clear on the USS Missouri when Japan surrendered, and he had done an effective naval blockade of Japan, and they were negotiating a surrender with the Vatican. There was no need to drop those 2 bombs. That had to do with something else, right? Bertrand Russell's one world dictatorship, basically. So when he saw that destruction, his speech, he said, you know, now we have to find a means of resolving conflict other than war. I mean, here's this general who was in World War I, World War II. His father was in the Civil War, you know, and he's saying we can never have another war. He said mankind can annihilate itself. And he said we are spiritually behind where we are scientifically. We haven't evolved enough morally, culturally, to be able to properly use the incredible breakthroughs that we're making in science and technology.
So what if the Germans, as an example, as we pull out of NATO, say, wait a minute, now I'm scared because I don't have nuclear weapons anymore. I don't have American bases in my country. So I no longer have the nuclear umbrella over my country, Germany. I should go and get nuclear weapons. Are we okay with that? Not okay? Do we care? I mean, the argument that everyone will give, and I don't know how you feel about the argument, but is, look, we have to stay in NATO because as long as we're there, our nuclear shield protects all of them, and they won't get nuclear weapons because they know they have ours. And that's the value of us being in NATO. So where
Well,
do you go with that argument?
I wonder why Germany views Russia, which had been supplying them reliably with gas for 50 years, as a threat, and the United States, which spied on their chancellor and has cut off their gas, an ally. I mean, that's the question I would have to ask them. I think that the whole order of relationships among nations has to change. We have to
So,
think
but I'm
what
talking in this case. I'm trying to be clearer on the nuclear side of this, right? The
right.
nuclear weapon piece, right? There's a lot of people who are like, no one can have nuclear weapons but us. You know, we gotta punish Iran so they don't have nuclear weapons. We've got to stay in NATO so Poland doesn't get nuclear weapons, so Germany doesn't get nuclear weapons, so Sweden doesn't get nuclear weapons. That's the logic they tell you. This is why we have to stay in NATO. This is why we have to police the world and punish Iran to ensure none of them get nuclear weapons. Where do you stand? I mean, if you win this thing or get your voice, either way, you're going to have an influence on this. Where would your influence go?
Well, I definitely agree with non-proliferation.
You do. Okay.
Yeah, and I actually in discussions with Scott Ritter, and I know he's had some Russian military people on his program. He really thinks that this question of arms reduction has to be a major discussion when we get to the other side of this, presuming we do when we don't blow ourselves up in the meantime, which I think is a risk. I hate to say it, but you see people who are literally, they seem to be conscienceless.
Yes. Yes, you're right. James of Conscious says, having family from both sides of the war is heartbreaking. I really hope that there's peace soon for the sake of the people whose lives are being ruined by this conflict. Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. 100%. So let me see if I can grab some more. Michael's a fan. Michael says, Diane is so well spoken and knowledgeable. I'm learning so much. Thanks. Look at that.
Thanks.
You're doing something good. You're winning my audience over, Diane. Whatever you're doing, it's working. So that's good. I like that. That's good. So Ryan goes to that the World Economic Forum will never ever allow peace, deal, or treaty. Too much money to be made by them. That's kind of what you're saying, isn't it, Diane? You're kind of saying what Ryan's saying.
They definitely don't intend to. That's what they're saying when they say Russia will never be allowed to win. But see, this thing that happened with Liz Truss is a really good example of how these people bring about their own downfall. That is, we may not have the billions of dollars or the control of the media or the armies or the nuclear weapons or all the things that they have. But if you have a sort of humility that you know that you're not all knowing, and you know that there are universal principles which you can't violate, you will always come out on top in the end, because the people who think that they control everything invariably make major blunders, and they can be made to collapse of their own weight, or you create a circumstance where they collapse of their own weight.
Yes.
And I think that's what we're seeing potentially.
Well, this is the issue that you find. I mean, many libertarians speak about this all the time, which is the idea of the military-industrial complex, right? The idea that this is a massive jobs program, which is what it is, right? The military-industrial complex is a massive government jobs program. And I'm not mad at somebody who's necessarily making any money doing that. Paying your bills, you got to pay your bills. I get it. But the problem that we have is I think there's a chunk of America who's anti-military industrial complex who think that these companies and corporations and global companies are evil. And I don't think they're evil. I mean, people disagree with me, but I think they're not evil. They're apathetic. They just want to make money. They want to sell expensive goods at high prices. That's what they want. And if those goods happen to kill people, oh, well, I don't care. I just want to make the money. And if we were able to change kind of how they can make money and give them more opportunity to still make money, right? Still making people still have jobs, but not blowing people up, that they probably would do it. I don't know. Where do you stand on that? Am I off on this?
No, I think it's absolutely true. I do think there are some people who are evil. There's some
Yes, agreed.
people in the Congress or people who make policy who have stock in these companies, and they are sort of distantly aware that some little people may be suffering horribly, but it doesn't really affect them. I mean,
Right.
that's really evil. But sure, especially people who work there. I have a colleague, actually, his name is Joel DeJean, a Haitian American who's running for Congress down in Texas. He used to work for Texas Instruments and Raytheon. And he said when he realized that what he was designing and building was being used to kill people in Yemen, he didn't want to work there anymore. And
Mm,
he said most people there don't want to be designing things that are just going to be blown up and kill people. And the beautiful thing about a machine tool sector or this advanced machining capability is it can easily be retooled. You have skilled people who can
right.
make high speed rail, they can make nuclear power plants, they can design modern sewer systems, they can do
Sure.
all of these things. I think they would be thrilled to do this. And frankly, they would have a more reliable and durable source of income because they wouldn't just be blowing everything up. They would be doing things that would be giving back over a long time.
Absolutely. Brian says, peace and friendly commerce with all, entangling alliances with none. Thomas Jefferson. Yeah, I like that idea too. Absolutely. So Ryan agrees. He says, mankind does indeed need to grow up. Yes,
Yes.
absolutely. Yes. And Michael says, NATO is going to get us into World War III. Yes, absolutely. The Terror Wombat says, Libya is why all the worst characters are seeking nuclear. Um, I feel like there's some truth to that, right? When Libya decided to stop, all of a sudden they got invaded and Gaddafi got killed. Is there some truth to that, or is the
Sure.
Terror
Well,
Wombat
remember, no, remember that's how Bolton sabotaged the North Korea talks. I mean, this was
mm,
one of the miraculous things that Trump was involved in. And apparently, among the documents they seized at Mar-a-Lago was the entire plan put forward by Kim Jong-un to denuclearize, to
is
get
that
rid of his
right?
nuclear. Yeah, I heard that from Scott Ritter, who I think would know, being a former weapons inspector. Um,
Wow,
yeah, and
wow, that's crazy.
remember what Bolton did? He threatened. He said, if you don't blah blah, you're going to go the way of Libya. Well, that's a hell of a threat because Gaddafi totally complied, gets overthrown, and then brutally and violently killed as he's being dragged
Absolutely,
through the streets. Who wants to go through that? That's certainly not incentive to give up your nuclear weapons.
absolutely. Jesse says they're evil in a fascist system, productive in a free market system. Well, I like that, Jesse. So let's stop being fascist, is what he's trying to say. But I think that's kind of what we're saying, right? They're going to act in the way that the environment shows them that they should act, right? If the incentives are make bombs and blow people up, then they make bombs and blow people up. If the incentives are build high speed rail, then they'll build high speed rail. I think that's kind of what he's saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think partly we're dealing with a horrible problem because probably you and I have some vague, distant memory of a time when the United States had a productive economy,
Yep.
when your friends' parents actually built things or did things,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then we said, no, 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 white blue collar is dirty, don't produce, you should be a
Right.
consumer. Well,
Yes.
when you're a consumer, you never have to think about the consequences of your action. You don't have to follow if you do X, Y will happen, right?
Hmm.
When you're just sitting there consuming, somehow reality doesn't matter. You never have to think about the future.
Right.
And so we have a generation that seems to be kind of oblivious to the consequences of their actions.
Yes. So then let me move to the next level if I could.
Mhm.
If we could shift to military industrial complex, that'd be awesome. But you were talking about what they could build. You said high speed rail, but you also said nuclear power plants. Now that's controversial. Now to be forward, everyone who watches me knows I'm for nuclear power. I think it's awesome. I'm all about generation four nuclear power plants. I think we should build three in New York State in the North Country. I've been saying this literally for 5 years. So I'm already on board. However, Not everybody in this country is. A lot of people think nuclear is crazy. The Green Party says they love green energy and then hates nuclear energy, right? I mean, Howie Hawkins is a friend of mine. I love Howie, but Howie's wrong on this one. Howie's like, nuclear energy is dirty. It'll never work. Gen 4 is not going to work. Where do you stand on this? And you said nuclear power. Are you talking Gen 4 also? Where's your head on
Well,
this?
sure, absolutely. We should get to fusion, but I thought your
Fusion.
description that I heard last night in that debate was very accurate, right? Because when you have the fourth generation high temperature reactors, you can
Yeah.
use so-called spent fuel rods are your fuel. You're reprocessing the waste. We have enough of that to generate power for, I don't know, hundreds of years. We shouldn't be
Yeah.
burying the stuff. We should be using it for fuel. And the little 4% left that you can't use gives very interesting medical isotopes. And there's a whole
Oh, I
field.
didn't realize that.
People, yeah, I have a friend up in Massachusetts who's working on what they call hormesis, which is that there's threshold levels where something is very beneficial, and when you cross the
Hmm.
threshold, it becomes bad, poisonous. But apparently, low dose radiation used to be used all the time very effectively to cure pneumonia.
Huh.
And they've
Okay.
discovered that it's actually had beneficial results with COVID patients, that it helps the lungs to rejuvenate and become, flexible again or whatever it does. And very low. So
Wow.
there's all kinds of very fascinating um, things that you can do with these different radioactive isotopes.
That's
So it's not
amazing. I
waste
love
at
that.
all. Yeah, it's
So
very
the other thing I
exciting.
brought up is I've heard you say this, and I say this too. Years ago, I used to work with a nonprofit called Oceana, and the leader there, the executive director there, once told me. He said, "Larry, don't forget something. If you have unlimited energy, you have unlimited water. If you have unlimited water, you have unlimited energy. Right? That's kind of how that works." And I brought up the idea of for New York State specifically, but you even doubled down on it. I said, if we have nuclear power plants in New York State, we could actually have a desalination plant in the Bronx that'd be run by a nuclear power plant, and then none of the water has to come from upstate into New York City. New York City can create its own fresh water from the ocean, right? We could do that. We have enough power to
Mhm.
do that kind of thing. Excuse me. You've talked about that too. So you are all about cheaper energy, and I forgot how you bring it. You talk about the idea of, I'm just going to say it. You're going to correct me. The
Okay,
amount of energy per land or something like that, right? The amount of energy
exactly.
used per land. Help me out with that.
Well, energy flux density is
Energy
the term.
flux density. There we go.
Right. So the energy throughput per given area of land and also per capita.
Ah,
And
okay.
right, and it is natural if you look at the development of the biosphere, if you take the most primitive forms of life
Hmm.
through uh, reptiles, amphibians, they don't control their body temperature through mammals, through human beings. What you discover is that these forms of life have to consume more calories per weight. That is, a jellyfish
Mm,
doesn't have to bother to heat itself. It doesn't need very much energy, right?
right.
But when you are a mammal and you have to regulate temperature, you actually need more energy to sustain that. And that's a
Got it.
natural process of evolution.
Got it.
So, and there's a great Russian Ukrainian scientist named Vernadsky who worked on this a lot, the relationship between the abiotic, the non-living like rocks and things, the
Hmm.
biosphere, living things, and then he called it the noosphere, which is the realm of human creativity.
Huh. Okay. I like
Because
that.
yeah, because human beings through our existence, we now consume much more energy per capita than we did if we were living in a cave.
Sure.
That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing because it means that you don't have to do physical labor. You don't have to go pump, water out of a well somewhere and carry it on your
True.
head and walk 10 miles and die at the age of 37, right? That you can use electricity to
Right.
do all these things. And that's actually natural. Unfortunately, I think the environmentalist movement, they they say no, no, we should decrease our carbon footprint. You should consume less energy, eat less. And when you do that, you lower the ability of the human race to survive.
Yes, I agree completely. The scientific libertarian says those hippies in the Green Party are the reasons they don't get built. Politicians cave to the alarmist. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
So there is
hysteria,
someone
like
else
Greta
here.
Thunberg, that little girl.
That's
The
correct.
sky is
Yes.
like
Yes. Peter says all the oil wars would stop if cannabis was unregulated and free to use and grow. What is your view on cannabis right now? I know recently the Biden administration has made a nice smile or wave to cannabis users by saying that if you were any all possession charges are going to be erased at the federal level.
Mhm.
A lot of people who care about cannabis want at the federal level for it to be removed from Schedule 1. Do you have any views on cannabis?
I am definitely not enthusiastic about it. I,
Mhm,
however, feel like the ship may have sailed in terms
mhm.
of, I certainly don't think people should be given long or any jail sentences for using it or growing it. The
So
problem
you would
is,
be in favor of pulling it off of Schedule 1 or no?
I have to look at it and figure out how to do it because I really don't want to encourage people to use more of it.
Okay. All right.
Um, and what
So
I think is really horrible is Schumer's bill, his so-called Marijuana Freedom and Opportunity Act, because that commercializes it. It uses, I mean, they want all these dispensaries with the super high THC, super refined. This is not what you grow in your backyard.
mhm,
And in fact, since the legalization in New York, the number of children going to the emergency room has increased sixfold because they're finding things that look like candy. So and if you want to tax that and pay high prices, then what you're doing, in my mind, is like where they build gambling casinos in poor
mhm.
areas. You want to encourage addictive behavior. You want a whole bunch of people addicted, then they're going to be a cash cow, and you don't care the what happens to the society. It's a way of manipulating and controlling people. And he pretends that it's decriminalization because he cares so much about the poor people who ended up in prison, about whom he doesn't give a damn, but he has a plan to make a lot of money off of it. Um,
Okay. So
yeah.
let me go to a second question, because this is Pete. Pete says thoughts on ending the Fed, meaning
Yep.
the Federal Reserve. Do you have any thoughts on the Federal
Yes.
Reserve?
Yes. And we're going to disagree. You may know I had a fun discussion with Bill Schmidt on this topic. Um, because, yes, the Fed should absolutely be abolished, but we need a national bank. You have to
Okay.
have a national bank because you have to be able to direct credit into the things that are going to be good for the nation. Now, I know people, and it says in the Constitution, the Congress decides when to issue credit or coin money or however it's put in there.
Mm,
So people say, yeah, but the Congress sucks. Well, that's true. That's very true. However, you have a better chance of getting control of the Congress and what they do than you do of some bunch of perverted billionaires who meet at the Grove and make their decisions in private about what happens with the money. So the Federal Reserve is totally unconstitutional. I do think you need a national bank. And then we're going to have to work our rear ends off to make sure the Congress represents us. And if we
okay.
can't do it through the elections, we have to do it by what you've probably seen some of my friends doing with AOC and Obama. You're going to have to stand up in their town hall meetings and make a commotion and gang up
Use
on
your
them.
voice.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So I've kind of talked about what I wanted to talk about, and I took a bunch of questions from the audience, but I want to ask you, right? You've taken the plunge. You've taken a chunk of your life to go do this. You've spending your
Hmm.
own money and treasure, and you're getting your friends and family and people your supporters to help you and do all the things. What's kind of like your number one issue? I know there's 1,000 issues, but kind of what's the one that's kind of floating to the top for you?
Well, I think the most urgent issue is to not have a nuclear war. I
Okay.
mean, I'm
So
not sure we're
we
out
were
of
in the
the
right
woods on
area.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that is the number one issue. We can fight about these other things. If we're alive, we can figure them out. But if we're dead, then we don't solve anything. And I think right now that's the number one burning issue because I don't trust the current administration to pull back. You keep seeing one horrible thing after the next, and you say, when do they stop? Do they have any shame? I mean, the fact that Liz Truss seems to have sent this text looks like Britain was involved in the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline. Russia says they have irrefutable evidence that the UK was overseeing these drone attacks on Sevastopol, which shut down who holds them accountable? If no one can hold them accountable, if there's no consequences for these actions, then what's to stop us from crossing that line to a nuclear war? So that's number one.
That's number one. Okay. Do you have a pet issue, like something on the side that you like is not that critical, but that you personally care about? Like the world doesn't care about as much, but you kind of care about.
Well, yes, I have that, but let me just say equally important in a way is this financial reorganization. I think we have to stop bailing out these banks. Yeah, we got to put the system through bankruptcy. We have to reinstate Glass-Steagall, which I know you're familiar with and have spoken about. We have to divide look, investment houses, fine, you can gamble, but if you go to a gambling casino, you don't get a money back guarantee if you lose all your money in the casino. That's what we're doing with these people. So we got to have Glass-Steagall in place. That's very urgent. Something that's not talked about much, but which is very dear to me, is the question of culture. Because you hear, and people are very concerned about the rising violence. And then they say, well, then what we have to do is impose all these gun control. That's not going to solve it. You're just going to have people stabbing each other or running over each other in their cars. Or we have a violent society.
Yes.
And I think that is because of the culture, because of the despair, the total anxiety.
Yes, despair. You see it, loneliness even, right?
Right.
Loneliness, the idea of not having good communities, not having good purpose. 100%. Yeah.
Right. And drug use, legal and illegal drugs. So many people are on a million medications.
Yes.
People don't know how to manage their emotions, and they're actually taught that if you're depressed, it's bad. Well, if your world is going to hell and we're facing nuclear war and everyone around you is becoming homeless, maybe you're right to be depressed. Maybe, and not, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's not bad to feel bad. You don't have to pop a pill.
That, right? I've always said that America, particularly in the last 30 years, has an obsession with optimism. And optimism is not a bad thing, but it's an obsession.
Right.
So when someone's feeling bad, we feel awkward if they feel bad. So we try to force them to not feel bad so we don't feel bad. So it's like, cheer up, it's okay. And I deal with my children, my friends. I say, when you look at someone and go, it's not that bad, or cheer up, you're actually making things worse, because now you've just invalidated their feelings. So they already feel bad, and now you're telling them, don't feel bad. So not only do you feel bad, but also you're stupid. So I've just done that too. I've just said that on top of it. I'm not making things better. What I should be saying is, to your point, is, hey, why do you feel bad? All these terrible things are happening. And I would go, yeah, that sucks. You probably should feel bad. What can we do to fix some of these things? And now I've said, how can we fix the things? Not, you shouldn't feel bad.
Right.
And I think that is a much stronger way. And I think you're right. We don't do that. We just go, Diane, just fake smile and everything will be, or worse, here's a drug so you feel nothing.
Right.
And then you won't smile, you won't cry, you'll just feel nothing. You will now be numbed. And that's a big worry. I agree.
Right. So I think that has to, and that's why the economy has to be changed, because every child should know that they are needed, that we need every person. We have a culture that just throws people on the scrap heap. We have this huge population which is rotating between the prison system, the homeless shelters. We used to have mental hospitals. They've been largely shut down altogether. So we treat people as though they're useless. And then
Yes.
we use people as weapons, like busing migrants around or taking people who are homeless and putting them in hotels during COVID only to bail out the hotel industry, not because
Yes.
you give a damn about these people. Whereas if
Yes.
we said, look, we need a totally modern sewer system in New York City, we need to rebuild the entire subway system. Maybe we need to build an entirely new city 50 miles away and move everyone out while we fix Manhattan. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
We would have a totally different view of our population. We'd say, this guy is a little slow, but he's really good at X. And we're
Mm.
going to employ him doing X because we need his part to get where we're going. And there's
Right.
nothing like the satisfaction of knowing that you're needed, knowing
Yeah.
that you made a contribution for the good that will live on after you.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so good. So good. So we're running out of time. So I want to be good to
Mhm.
you. What should people know about you? Where can they see you? What can they do to help out?
Well, they should visit sareforsenate.com.
There we
You could
go.
sign up and volunteer. We have tons of literature still that needs to go out. We're going to be all over the place Saturday and Sunday if you want to come join a distribution. Um, you go on the website. I'm going to be in the Ithaca area on Saturday if you want to meet up. Um, and yeah, sign
There we
up.
go. Absolutely, guys. And always, if you like this, like, comment, and share. It does matter. Let people notice it's happening. And lastly, please support my sponsors. They're the ones who allow it to happen. The World's Smallest Political Quiz, theadvocates.org. Click that link right there. And why you should take the test is when you take that test, even take it again, take it anyway, and then share the results, and other people will start taking it and talking about the big issues. It starts conversations, because if we don't have conversations, we can't make things work. We can't fix things without it. So please do that. It does matter. Dan, I want to say thank you for stopping by. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. It was a really fun conversation.
Excellent. And my chat likes you too. So that's good on top of
Okay.
it. All good. All good. So
Great.
great.
Okay.
I will see you all